They saw a black man in a cheap suit and saw a conviction. They didn't see the man who signed their paychecks. Judge Edward Caldwell and prosecutor Ryan Brooks ran the 4th District Court like their own private kingdom, trading verdicts for favors and crushing anyone who didn't fit their image of a proper citizen. When Malcolm Hayes stood before them, silent and observant, they smirked, thinking they had another easy target for their prison quota. But they made a fatal error. They didn't check the new state appointments. They didn't know that the defendant in handcuffs wasn't just innocent. He was the newly appointed chairman of the Judicial Conduct Committee. And he was there to burn their corrupt empire to the ground. This is the story of the trap that snapped back. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B had been broken for as long as anyone could remember. Or at least that's how it felt. The air was thick, smelling of floor wax, stale coffee, and the desperate sweat of the accused. Judge Edward Caldwell sat on the bench, his robe slightly unzipped at the top to let his neck breathe. He was a man of heavy jowls and icy blue eyes that had long ago lost the capacity for empathy. To Caldwell, the courtroom wasn't a place of justice. It was a processing plant. He checked his Rolex, a gift from a friend in commercial real estate, and scowled. He wanted to be at the Ridgeview Country Club soon. Next case. Caldwell grunted, not even looking up from his docket. The state calls the case of the state versus Malcolm Hayes, the bailiff announced, his voice bored and droning. Docket number 449. Charges aggravated assault on a peace officer, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Malcolm Hayes was led in. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a gray suit that looked a size too small, likely provided by a public defender's closet. His hands were cuffed in front of him. He walked with a calm, almost unnerving, steady gait. He didn't look at the floor. He looked directly at the bench. Judge Caldwell finally looked up. He saw a black man in his mid-40s with a shaved head and a stoic expression. Caldwell's lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of disdain he had perfected over decades on the bench. In Caldwell's mind, the verdict was already written. The man looked difficult. He looked like the type who questioned authority. "Mr. Hayes," Caldwell said, his tone dripping with condescension, "do you have counsel, or are we wasting the taxpayers' money on a public defender today?" A young woman, barely out of law school, stepped forward. This was Rachel Thompson, a public defender who was drowning in a caseload of 200 clients. She looked exhausted. "I'm representing Mr. Hayes, Your Honor. We enter a plea of not guilty." "Of course you do," Caldwell muttered loud enough for the court reporter to hear, though she knew better than to type it. Sitting at the prosecution table was Ryan Brooks. Brooks was the district attorney's golden boy. Sleek hair, a tailored Italian suit that cost more than Rachel Thompson made in a month, and a smile that looked like a shark sensing blood. Brooks was running for state attorney the following year, and he needed tough-on-crime stats. He needed convictions. "Your Honor." Brooks stood up, buttoning his jacket. "The state requests bail be denied. The defendant attacked a uniformed officer during a routine traffic stop. He is a danger to the community and a flight risk. We have reason to believe he has no ties to this district." Rachel Thompson shot up. "Objection." "Your Honor, Mr. Hayes has no prior criminal record. The assault described in the police report was Mr. Hayes raising his hands to shield his face when Officer Powell initiated physical contact. He is a homeowner in this county." Caldwell slammed his gavel down. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "Miss Thompson, do not testify for your client. I have the police report right here. It says your client lunged aggressively. In my courtroom, the word of a veteran officer like Sergeant Powell holds weight. I'm setting bail at $500,000. A gasp rippled through the few people in the gallery. $500,000 for a traffic stop altercation with no injuries. It was unheard of. It was unconstitutional. Malcolm Hayes didn't flinch. He didn't protest. He simply adjusted his glasses and stared at Ryan Brooks, then shifted his gaze to Judge Caldwell. It wasn't a glare of anger. It was the look of a scientist examining bacteria under a microscope. "Your Honor," Rachel stammered, "that is excessive. My client cannot pay." "Then he stays in county," Caldwell snapped. "Next case." As the bailiff grabbed Malcolm's arm to pull him away, Malcolm spoke for the first time. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and controlled. "For the record, Your Honor," Malcolm said, his eyes locking onto the judge's nameplate, "are you stating that my lack of prior record is irrelevant to your bail determination?" Caldwell turned red. He wasn't used to defendants speaking in complete sentences, let alone questioning his logic. "One more word, Mr. Hayes, and I'll hold you in contempt. Get him out of here." As Malcolm was led through the side door back to the holding cells, he caught the eye of Prosecutor Brooks. Brooks winked at him, a cocky, arrogant wink that said, "I own you." Malcolm just blinked slowly. He wasn't worried about the bail. He wasn't worried about the jail. He was memorizing faces. The courtroom was empty. The judge retreated to his chambers, a spacious office lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with law books he hadn't opened in years. He poured himself a glass of scotch, no ice, and loosened his tie. There was a knock at the private entrance, and Ryan Brooks walked in without waiting for an answer. This was their ritual. They called it strategy coordination. The law called it ex parte communication, and it was strictly illegal. 500 grand. "Edward," Brooks laughed, pouring himself a drink from the judge's decanter. "You're trying to bury this guy deep." "He annoyed me," Caldwell grunted, sinking into his leather chair. "Did you see the way he looked at me? Like he was grading my performance. Besides, you said you needed this one fast-tracked. What's the rush?" Brooks sat on the edge of the heavy desk, swinging a polished loafer. "It's not just the stats. You know, the construction project on 4th and Main Street? The new luxury condos, the ones backed by the terrified investors from Chicago." "Exactly," Brooks said. "The land dispute. There's a holdout owner on the adjacent lot. A shell company called Vanguard Holdings owns the alleyway access. We need that access for the cranes. If we don't get it, the project stalls. I did some digging. The registered agent for Vanguard Holdings is a Malcolm Hayes." Caldwell's eyebrows shot up. "The guy we just sent down." "The very same," Brooks smirked. "He's not just a random traffic stop. Sergeant Powell pulled him over because I asked him to keep an eye out for the car. We need Hayes desperate. We need him to plead out. If he's facing 5 years for assault, he'll sign over that alleyway easement for a reduced sentence and probation. We get the land, the condos go up, the property values in the district skyrocket, and your investments in the construction firm yield a nice 20% return." Caldwell swirled his scotch, a greedy light entering his eyes. "So it's a shakedown. It's urban development, Edward," Brooks corrected him smoothly. "We're cleaning up the city. Hayes is just debris." "He claimed he was a homeowner," Caldwell recalled. "I thought he was lying. He probably owns a rundown shack." Brooks waved a hand dismissively. "He doesn't look like money. He looks like labor. Even if he owns the lot, he doesn't have the cash to fight us. The public defender, Thompson, she'll tell him to take the deal. She's too overworked to fight a trial." Caldwell chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You're a wicked bastard, Ryan. That's why I like you. But be careful. That public defender is green, but she's annoying. Don't let her find out about the land interest. She won't, Brooks assured him. And even if she does, who's she gonna tell? You? You're the judge. They both laughed. It was the laughter of men who believed they were untouchable gods in a small world. Meanwhile, in the holding cell of the county jail, Malcolm Hayes sat on a metal bench. The cell smelled of urine and bleach. Most men would be pacing, screaming or crying. Malcolm was perfectly still. He closed his eyes and mentally replayed the conversation in the courtroom. He had anticipated the bias, but the severity of the bail confirmed something darker. $500,000 bail for a Class C felony with no priors. That wasn't just racism, that was tactical. They wanted him in a cage. The heavy steel door clanged open. A guard threw a sandwich wrapped in plastic onto the bench. "Eat up, Hayes. Your lawyer is here." Rachel Thompson walked in. She looked even more frazzled than before. She sat on the stool on the other side of the plexiglass divider. "Okay, mister." "Hayes," she said, opening a thick file. "I'm going to be honest. It looks bad. Judge Caldwell has it out for you. I've seen him do this before, but never this aggressively on a first offense. But I have some weird news." Malcolm leaned forward. "Go on." "I tried to look up your financial records to file a motion for bail reduction based on indigency," Rachel said, frowning at her notes. "But every time I run your social security number, the system gives me an error code. Level 5 access required. I've never seen that before." "Who are you, Mr. Hayes?" Malcolm smiled. It was a genuine warm smile that completely transformed his face. "Miss Thompson, do you believe in justice?" "I try to," she stammered. "That's why I do this job. But today, it feels like a losing battle." "It's only a losing battle if you're fighting with the weapons they expect you to use," Malcolm said softly. "I need you to do something for me. Don't file for bail reduction. Let me stay in here." "What? Why?" "It's dangerous in here. I need to see how the deputies treat the inmates on the night shift," Malcolm said enigmatically. "And when the trial date is set, I want you to file a motion for discovery. Specifically, I want the dash cam footage from Sergeant Powell's cruiser, and I want the GPS logs of his patrol unit for the period prior to my arrest." Powell claims the camera was malfunctioning. Rachel sighed. "That's convenient. File the motion anyway," Malcolm commanded. "And one more thing, go to the law library, look up State Statute 19B, subsection 4, regarding judicial conflicts of interest in land disputes." Rachel's eyes widened. "Land disputes? This is an assault case, is it?" Malcolm whispered. "Trust me, Rachel. By the time court resumes, you're going to be the most dangerous lawyer in this building. But you have to trust me. Can you do that?" Rachel looked at the man in the orange jumpsuit. There was a power radiating from him that didn't fit the setting. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a hunter waiting in a blind. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll file the motion." "Good." Malcolm nodded. "Now go home. Rest. The show starts when court resumes." As Rachel left, Malcolm reached into his jumpsuit. He had managed to smuggle a small flat device, a digital voice recorder roughly the size of a stick of gum, into the cell, taped to the inside of his thigh. He wasn't supposed to have it, but he knew the intake procedures of this jail were lax for nonviolent offenders. He pressed the playback button. He hadn't recorded the judge's chambers. He wasn't that close, but he had recorded the intake officer bragging to another deputy about Brooks' special guest and how they needed to rough him up a bit. So he takes the plea. Malcolm clicked the device off. Strike one, he thought. Nighttime in the county jail was a different world. The administrative staff had gone home, the lights dimmed to a sickly yellow hum, and the night crew took over. These were the deputies who didn't fit in polite society, the ones who enjoyed the power a little too much. Malcolm Hayes lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling. He hadn't slept. He was listening. 3 cells down, a young kid named Tyler, probably no older than 19, was crying. He had been brought in for possession of marijuana, a charge that usually warranted a ticket. But in Caldwell's district, it meant a stay to teach him a lesson. "Shut up, kid," a voice boomed from the corridor. It was Deputy Harlan, a man with a neck thick as a tree stump and a reputation for breaking fingers accidentally during transport. Malcolm sat up slowly. He checked the position of the small recorder taped to his leg. It was running. Harlan and another deputy, a nervous-looking rookie named Carson, stopped in front of Malcolm's cell. Harlan twirled a baton, the heavy rubber slapping against his palm. Thwack, thwack. "So this is the cop fighter." Harlan sneered, unlocking the cell door. Brooks sent word. "Said you might need an attitude adjustment." The door slid open. Malcolm stood up. He didn't retreat to the corner. He stood in the center of the cell, hands loosely at his sides. "Deputy Harlan," Malcolm said, his voice level. "And Deputy Carson, badge numbers 492 and 511, respectively." Harlan paused, confused. "You memorized our badges. You think that's going to save you?" "I'm merely establishing a record," Malcolm said. "Before you proceed, I want you to consider something. There are cameras in the hallway. I know you've turned them off. That's a violation of Department of Corrections Policy 8.4. But sound carries." "You think you're a lawyer now?" Harlan stepped inside, looming over Malcolm. "Lawyers can't help you in here. There's no witnesses." Harlan swung the baton. It wasn't a kill shot. It was a gut shot meant to wind him, to make him crumple. Malcolm moved with surprising efficiency. He didn't block it. He sidestepped, letting the baton hit the metal bunk frame with a deafening clang. In the same motion, Malcolm stepped into Harlan's personal space, his face inches from the deputies. "If you touch me," Malcolm whispered, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen, "you will lose your pension. You will lose your badge, and you will spend the next 10 years in a cell just like this one, surrounded by the men you've tormented. Is Ryan Brooks worth that? Does he pay you enough to destroy your life?" Harlan froze. It wasn't a physical threat. It was the absolute certainty in Malcolm's eyes. This wasn't the desperation of a criminal. It was the authority of a superior. For a split second, Harlan felt like he was the one in handcuffs. "What is this guy?" Carson whispered from the doorway, looking spooked. "Harlan, let's go. The sergeant is coming down soon for rounds. We can't leave marks." Harlan glared at Malcolm, breathing heavily. The psychological wall Malcolm had erected was impenetrable. "You're lucky, Hayes. Court resumes fast." They slammed the cell door and locked it. Malcolm let out a breath he had been holding. He sat back down. He reached into his pocket and clicked the recorder off, then immediately back on to start a new file. Attempted assault. Conspiracy to intimidate a witness. Prosecutor Ryan Brooks. The time in county jail was a test of endurance. Malcolm watched as other inmates were denied water. He watched as medical requests were ignored. He saw the systemic rot of the 4th District Court system from the inside out. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. He was gathering evidence for the biggest judicial review the state had ever seen. Meanwhile, the judge was having a very different experience at the Ridgeview Country Club. He sat on the terrace overlooking the 18th hole, a cigar in one hand and a gin and tonic in the other. Across from him sat Ryan Brooks and a man named Mr. Clayton, the developer for the luxury condos. "So, the alleyway issue," Clayton said, wiping sweat from his forehead. He was a nervous man who hated getting his hands dirty. "We're behind schedule, Edward. The investors are asking questions. Relax, Bob. Caldwell laughed, ash falling onto his polo shirt. The owner of the obstruction is currently enjoying the hospitality of our county jail. He'll be begging to sign that deed just to get out on probation. You're sure? Clayton asked. What if he fights? He has a public defender. Brooks chimed in, popping an olive into his mouth. Rachel Thompson. She's a sweet girl, but she's drowning. She'll advise him to plead. We offer him time served and a suspended sentence in exchange for the property rights. It's a win-win. He goes free, you get your land, and Edward here gets his return. It feels risky, Clayton muttered. Risk is for poor people, Caldwell declared, signaling the waiter for another round. We are the law, Bob. In the 4th District, reality is what I say it is. They clinked glasses, unaware that a young public defender was staring at a computer screen in the basement of the law library, her mouth hanging open in shock. Rachel Thompson hadn't slept. Her apartment was covered in sticky notes and printouts. Malcolm had told her to look up State Statute 19B. It was an obscure law rarely cited regarding judicial disclosure in real estate transactions involving municipal interests. It essentially stated that if a judge or prosecutor had a financial interest in a case, however indirect, they had to recuse themselves immediately. Failure to do so wasn't just a mistrial. It was a felony. But that wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was what she found when she dug into the shell companies. Malcolm had told her to look into Vanguard Holdings, the company that owned the land Malcolm was supposedly protecting. When she finally cracked the corporate veil, she expected to see Malcolm's name. She did. But not just Malcolm Hayes. The document listed the registered agent as Malcolm E. Hayes, trustee for the State Judicial Oversight Committee. Rachel froze. She reread the line. The Judicial Oversight Committee. That was the body that policed judges. That was the internal affairs of the court system. If Malcolm Hayes was a trustee for them, he wasn't a random guy. He was a high-ranking official. She frantically typed his name into the State Bar Association database. Nothing. She tried the federal database. There it was. Malcolm Eleazar Hayes, former federal prosecutor, chief ethics officer for the state Supreme Court, current chairman of the Special Task Force on Judicial Corruption. Rachel pushed her chair back, gasping for air. Her client wasn't a mechanic or a laborer. He was the chairman, the traffic stop, the assault. It was all a setup, but not by the police. Malcolm had set himself up. He had dangled himself as bait to see if Caldwell and Brooks would bite. He wanted to see if they would violate his rights, if they would try to extort him for the land, if they would deny him bail. And they had done all of it. Oh my God, Rachel whispered. They jailed the guy who signs their licenses. She realized why Malcolm had kept quiet. He needed them to commit fully to the corruption. If he had revealed who he was earlier, they would have backpedaled, apologized, and swept it under the rug. But by keeping him in jail, by setting the exorbitant bail, by trying to extort the land, they had dug their own graves. And now Rachel Thompson, the overworked public defender, was the one holding the shovel. Court was back in session with a torrential downpour. Thunder rattled the windows of the courthouse, setting a grim, cinematic tone for the proceedings. Courtroom 4B was packed. Word had gotten out that Ryan Brooks was personally handling a violent assault case, and the press was there hungry for a tough-on-crime soundbite for the evening news. Judge Caldwell took the bench looking hungover. He banged the gavel. Recalling case 449, State versus Hayes, Caldwell grunted. Is the defense ready? Malcolm was brought in. He looked tired. He hadn't shaved in days, but his eyes were bright, sharp, and dangerous. He wore the same gray suit. He sat down next to Rachel. "Did you find it?" Malcolm whispered, not looking at her. "I found everything," Rachel whispered back, her hands trembling as she arranged her papers. You're the chairman." "Not yet," Malcolm corrected her softly. "Right now, I'm just a defendant." "Let them hang themselves, Rachel. Follow the script." Ryan Brooks stood up, playing for the cameras. "Your Honor," Brooks began, his voice smooth. "Over the recess, my office has reviewed the severity of the defendant's actions. However, in the interest of judicial economy and mercy, the state is willing to offer a plea deal." "Go on," Caldwell said, feigning interest. "If Mr. Hayes pleads guilty to a reduced charge of simple disorderly conduct and agrees to civil restitution regarding the property dispute at 4th and Main Street, specifically signing over the easement rights to the developers, the state will recommend time served and immediate release." Brooks smiled at the cameras. He looked like a benevolent king granting pardon to a peasant. "We just want the city to move forward, Your Honor." Caldwell turned to the defense table. "You hear that, Miss Thompson? That is a gift, a literal gift. I assume your client accepts." Rachel stood up. Her legs felt like jelly, but she looked at Malcolm, who gave her a barely perceptible nod. "Your Honor," Rachel said, her voice cracking slightly before finding its strength. "The defense rejects the plea." The room went silent. Brooks's smile faltered. Caldwell leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" Caldwell spat. "Miss Thompson, I don't think you heard the prosecutor. He is offering your client freedom. If you go to trial, I promise you I will throw the book at him." "We are not going to trial, Your Honor," Rachel said, picking up a document. "And we are not accepting the plea. Instead, the defense moves for an immediate dismissal of all charges with prejudice," and she took a deep breath. "We are filing a formal motion for the immediate recusal of Judge Edward Caldwell and the disqualification of Prosecutor Ryan Brooks." Laughter broke out from the prosecution table. Brooks actually chuckled aloud. "On what grounds, Miss Thompson? Did you learn a new word in law school?" Rachel didn't flinch this time. She walked to the center of the courtroom. "On the grounds of State Statute 19B, Rachel declared, her voice ringing clear. "And on the grounds of criminal conspiracy, extortion, and fraud." Caldwell's face turned a violent shade of purple. "Bailiff, take her into custody for contempt. This is a circus. If you arrest me," Rachel shouted over the commotion, "you will only add to the count of the indictment. We have evidence that this court and the prosecutor's office conspired to falsely arrest the defendant for the specific purpose of coercing a real estate transaction regarding the Vanguard Holdings property." "That is a lie," Brooks shouted, standing up. "This is slander." "Is it?" Rachel turned to the gallery. "We have requested the dash cam footage, which shows no assault occurred. But more importantly, Your Honor, you failed to check who the trustee of Vanguard Holdings is." Caldwell froze. The gavel hovered in his hand. A cold seed of dread planted itself in his stomach. "The defendant," Rachel pointed at Malcolm, "is not just a property owner. He is the registered trustee for the State Judicial Oversight Committee." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb having just been armed. Brooks's face went pale. He looked at Malcolm. Malcolm wasn't looking at Rachel. He was looking directly at Caldwell. And for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of the executioner. "Mr. Hayes," Caldwell stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. Malcolm slowly stood up. The handcuffs clinked. "Miss Thompson is doing an excellent job," Malcolm said, his voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "But she missed one minor detail." Malcolm looked at the bailiff. Officer, would you please remove these cuffs? I believe you are currently detaining a federal officer. The bailiff looked at Caldwell. Caldwell was paralyzed. Do it, Caldwell whispered, terrified. The bailiff unlocked the cuffs. Malcolm rubbed his wrists. He reached into his jacket pocket, which had been returned to him before court, and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. The gold badge of the state Supreme Court glinted under the fluorescent lights. Edward Caldwell, Malcolm said, his voice booming. Ryan Brooks, you are not hearing a case today. You are the case. This is entrapment, Brooks shrieked. No, Mr. Brooks, Malcolm said calmly, walking toward the bench. Entrapment is forcing you to commit a crime you wouldn't otherwise commit. I simply stood on a sidewalk. You did the rest. You kidnapped me. You beat me. You attempted to extort me. And you did it all on the record. Malcolm turned to the back of the room. Agent Thompson, are you ready? From the back row of the gallery, two men in dark suits stood up. They weren't reporters. They were State Bureau of Investigation agents. They had been sitting there the whole time. We're ready, Mr. Hayes, one of them said. Malcolm turned back to the judge. Judge Caldwell, get off my bench. You're under arrest. The chaos in courtroom 4B was absolute. It wasn't the noisy chaos of a riot, but the terrifying high-stakes chaos of a regime collapsing in real time. Flashbulbs from the few press members present went off like strobes, capturing the image that would end two careers. Judge Edward Caldwell, purple-faced and sputtering, being hauled out of his high-backed leather chair by state agents. Get your hands off me, Caldwell screamed, his voice cracking. I am a judge of the Superior Court. I have immunity. This is a coup. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Thompson said, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. He spun Caldwell around and slammed him against the polished wood of the bench, the very altar Caldwell had defiled for years. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Ryan Brooks, the golden boy, had lost his shark-like composure. He was backing away toward the heavy oak doors, his eyes darting around for an exit. Malcolm, Brooks pleaded, holding his hands up. Mr. Hayes, please. I was just following procedure. Caldwell made me do it. I can cut a deal. I have files on the mayor. I have files on the police chief. Malcolm Hayes stood in the center of the storm, an island of calm. He adjusted his cuffs, smoothing the wrinkles in his cheap suit. He looked at Brooks with a mixture of pity and disgust. You're already trying to plea bargain, Ryan, Malcolm asked, his voice low but audible. You haven't even been booked yet. Save it for your public defender. I don't use public defenders, Brooks spat, panic overriding his sense. I'm Ryan Brooks. Your assets were frozen minutes ago, Malcolm said, checking his watch. RICO statutes are swift. You and Caldwell are being charged under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You don't have a dime to your name right now. Brooks's knees gave out. He collapsed onto the prosecution table, knocking over a pitcher of water. The water spilled over his expensive Italian suit, soaking the crotch, making it look like he had wet himself. The cameras caught that, too. Rachel Thompson stood by her desk, clutching her files to her chest. She felt like she was in a dream. She watched as the bailiff, the same one who had sneered at Malcolm earlier, hesitantly stepped aside to let the SBI agents pass. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. Miss Thompson, Malcolm said, turning to her. Rachel jumped. Yes, Mr. Hayes or Mr. Chairman. Malcolm is fine, he said gently. I need you to do one more thing for me as my counsel before I formally discharge you. Anything. I need you to file a motion to preserve all evidence in the clerk's office. Malcolm said Caldwell has a shredder in his chambers. I suspect his secretary is trying to use it right now. The SBI is heading there. But I want the legal paper trail to be bulletproof. Consider it done, Rachel said, a newfound confidence straightening her spine. She wasn't just a burnt-out public defender anymore. She was the attorney of record who had just taken down the king. As Caldwell was dragged past Malcolm in cuffs, he stopped struggling for a moment. He looked at the black man he had tried to crush. "Who sent you?" Caldwell hissed. "Was it the governor?" Malcolm leaned in close so only he could hear. "No one sent me, Edward. I came because I read the letters. The letters from the mothers of the boys you sent away for 20 years for first-time offenses. The letters from the homeowners you evicted to help your developer friends. You thought they were trash. I thought they were evidence." Caldwell paled. I can fix this. We can work something out." "You're going to jail, Edward," Malcolm whispered. "And the worst part? You're going to the same jail you sent them to. You're going to be in general population with the men whose lives you stole." Caldwell screamed as they dragged him out the door. The sound echoed down the marble hallway, a ghostly wail that marked the end of an era. In the county jail, Edward Caldwell sat on the bottom bunk of a cell that was significantly smaller than his bathroom at the Ridgeview Country Club. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that chafed his skin. The air smelled of mold and unwashed bodies. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the men in the cafeteria. They knew who he was. Word traveled fast inside. The hanging judge was now just inmate 8940. "Yo, Caldwell," a voice shouted from the cell across the catwalk. "You remember me? You sentenced me to 10 years for a busted taillight and a joint. I'm getting out next week on appeal, thanks to your little scandal. You want my leftovers?" A wet piece of bread flew through the bars and hit Caldwell in the chest. Caldwell scrambled back, pressing himself against the cold cinder-block wall. Guard, I need protective custody. I'm a high-profile target." A deputy walked by. It was Harlan, the same deputy who had threatened Malcolm. But Harlan didn't look arrogant anymore. He looked terrified. He knew the internal investigation was coming for him next. "Shut up, Caldwell," Harlan muttered, not even stopping. "PC is full. You're in Gen Pop." "I'll have your badge," Caldwell shrieked. "I have friends." "You ain't got no friends," a voice said from the cell door. Caldwell looked up. Standing there was Ryan Brooks. But Brooks looked broken. His hair was greasy, his face bruised. He had been placed in the cell next door. "Ryan," Caldwell whispered. "Ryan, you have to get hold of Clayton, the developer. He has the slush fund." Brooks laughed. A manic, broken sound. "Clayton turned state's evidence yesterday, Edward. He gave them everything. The ledger, the offshore accounts, the bribes. He threw us to the wolves to save his own skin." Caldwell felt his heart stop. The ledger. Everything. Brooks cried, sliding down the wall of his cell. "They know about the bribes from the construction unions. They know about the kickbacks from the private prison contracts. They even know about the time you buried the DUI charge for the senator's son. We need a lawyer." Caldwell stammered. "A real lawyer, not these public defenders. That's the best part," Brooks said, wiping snot from his nose. "Since our assets are frozen, we don't qualify for private counsel. I just met my lawyer." "Who?" "Some kid named Martinez. He's been a lawyer for 3 months. He has 300 cases." Brooks looked at Caldwell with dead eyes. "He told me to take a plea." The irony hit Caldwell like a physical blow. The machine he had built, the grinder designed to chew up the poor and the defenseless, was now chewing him. He was trapped in the belly of his own beast. Later that afternoon, the cell door opened. Caldwell expected a beating. Instead, he saw Malcolm Hayes. Malcolm was back in his own clothes, a sharp navy blue suit that screamed authority. He stood in the corridor, flanked by the warden, who looked nervous. "Mr. Hayes," the warden said, "you shouldn't be down here. It's a security risk." "I'll be fine, warden," Malcolm said calmly. "I just wanted to check on the conditions of the facility, since I'll be overseeing the restructuring of the district's judicial system." Malcolm looked into the cell. Caldwell scrambled up to the bars. "Malcolm, Mr. Hayes," Caldwell begged. "Please, I'm an old man. I can't survive in here. These animals, they'll kill me." "Animals?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "These are the citizens you were sworn to serve. If they are animals, Edward, it is because you treated them like livestock." "I was just doing what the system demanded," Caldwell cried. "I was tough on crime." "No," Malcolm said softly. "You were a criminal in a robe. You perverted the law for profit." Malcolm reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it through the bars. "What is this?" Caldwell asked, his hands trembling. "That is a copy of the plea deal the state is offering you," Malcolm said. "I advised the new district attorney on the terms." Caldwell unfolded it. His eyes widened. 20 years. No parole. Forfeiture of all assets and pension. 20 years. Caldwell gasped. "That's a death sentence at my age." "It's the same sentence you gave to a 19-year-old boy for selling weed 3 years ago," Malcolm said, coldly. "His name was Darius. He died in a prison fight last month. I thought the symmetry was appropriate." Malcolm turned to walk away. "Wait!" Caldwell screamed. "I'll fight it. I'll go to trial." Malcolm stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "I hope you do, Edward. Rachel Thompson is the lead prosecutor on your case. She's very motivated, and I'll be testifying." Malcolm walked away, the sound of his dress shoes clicking on the concrete floor. Behind him, Caldwell sank to the floor, sobbing into his hands. The trial of the state versus Caldwell, Brooks et al., had become more than just a legal proceeding. It was a national spectacle. The courthouse, once a fortress of quiet corruption, was now surrounded daily by news vans, protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for the innocent," and former defendants who had returned to watch their tormentors face the music. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was electric. The room had been renovated, literally and metaphorically. The dim yellowed lighting had been replaced with bright LEDs, and the oppressive smell of stale coffee was gone. But the biggest change was the bench. The high-backed leather chair, worn into the shape of Caldwell's slouch, was gone. In its place sat Chief Justice Diane Moore of the State Supreme Court, a woman known for her intellect and her absolute intolerance for ethical violations. The gallery was packed to capacity. In the front row sat the mothers of the Fourth, a group of women whose sons had been given maximum sentences by Caldwell for minor infractions. They sat in silent vigil, wearing white. At the prosecution table stood Rachel Thompson. She was unrecognizable from the frazzled, terrified public defender of before. She wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional bun, and her posture was that of a predator who had cornered its prey. She had been appointed as the special prosecutor for this case, a move orchestrated by Malcolm Hayes to ensure that the old boys club couldn't protect their own. At the defense table, separated by 3 empty chairs, sat Edward Caldwell and Ryan Brooks. They looked like ghosts. Caldwell had lost nearly 60 pounds. His skin hung loosely on his frame, gray and papery. The arrogance that had defined his existence was replaced by a twitchy, paranoid terror. He refused to look at the gallery. He stared at his hands, which were trembling uncontrollably. Ryan Brooks was worse. The golden boy had cracked under the pressure of pretrial confinement. His hair was thinning, his eyes were bloodshot, and he muttered constantly to himself. He had tried to cut a deal 3 times, offering to testify against Caldwell, but Rachel Thompson had rejected every offer. She didn't need his testimony. She had the tapes. "Is the jury ready?" Justice Moore asked, her voice calm but commanding. "They are, Your Honor," the bailiff replied. The door to the jury room opened. 12 citizens walked in. Unlike the juries Caldwell used to handpick, usually composed of retirees and friends of the police force, this jury was a true cross-section of the city. There was a schoolteacher, a mechanic, a nurse, a construction worker. They looked tired but resolute. Malcolm Hayes sat in the first row behind the prosecution watching. He was dressed in his standard gray suit, his face unreadable. He wasn't there to gloat. He was there to witness. "Please stand," the justice ordered. Caldwell struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the table. Brooks stood up quickly, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Mr. Foreman," Justice Moore said, "has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreman, a tall man who worked at the local steel mill, replied. He didn't look at the defendants. He looked straight at the judge. On count 1, racketeering and corruption under the RICO Act. "How do you find the defendant, Edward P. Caldwell?" The room held its breath. The silence was so heavy it felt like physical pressure. "Guilty," the foreman said. A collective exhale rushed through the room, a sound like wind moving through trees. Caldwell flinched as if he'd been slapped. "On count 2, conspiracy to deprive civil rights," the justice continued. "Guilty." On count 3, extortion. "Guilty." On count 4, false imprisonment. "Guilty." The list went on. 19 counts in total. 19 times the word guilty rang out like a bell tolling for a funeral. With every count, Caldwell sank lower, his physical stature collapsing along with his life. Then came Ryan Brooks. On the charge of prosecutorial misconduct and suborning perjury, how do you find the defendant, Ryan Brooks? "Guilty." On the charge of conspiracy to commit extortion. "Guilty." When the final verdict was read, Ryan Brooks let out a sob. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the pathetic whimper of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. Justice Moore nodded slowly. "The jury is thanked for their service. You are dismissed." As the jurors filed out, Justice Moore turned her gaze to the defendants. It was a look that could freeze water. "In 30 years on the bench," she began, her voice low, resonating through the microphone, "I have seen murderers, rapists, and terrorists. I have looked into the eyes of men who killed for fun, but I have never seen a more profound betrayal of the public trust than what has been presented in this courtroom." She picked up the sentencing file. "Edward Caldwell, you treated this court as your personal ATM. You sold the liberty of human beings for real estate deals and country club memberships. You didn't just break the law, you poisoned it. You made the people of this district fear the very institution designed to protect them." Caldwell tried to speak. "Your Honor, I am an old man." So was Mr. Henderson. Justice Moore cut him off sharply, referencing a witness from the trial. "An elderly man who had been evicted illegally to help a donor. Mr. Henderson died in a homeless shelter because of your ruling. You will find no sympathy here." She slammed the file closed. "Edward P. Caldwell, I sentence you to 25 years in the state penitentiary. Given the nature of your crimes, abuse of power against the populace, You are ineligible for protective custody. You will serve your time in general population." Caldwell let out a strangled scream. "You can't. They'll kill me. I put them there." "Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you filled the prison with men who didn't belong there," Moore said coldly. "Bailiff, take him into custody. And Mr. Brooks," she turned to the younger man, "you had a duty to seek justice, not convictions. You are sentenced to 15 years, and I am recommending to the Bar Association that you be permanently disbarred. You will never set foot in a courtroom again, unless you are wearing handcuffs." The gavel came down. Bang! The sound was final. It was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut on a dark chapter of history. As the bailiffs moved in, the gallery erupted. It wasn't cheering. It was applause. Slow, steady, rhythmic applause. The mothers of the Fourth stood up, tears streaming down their faces, clapping for the end of their nightmare. Caldwell was dragged out, his feet dragging on the floor, weeping openly. Brooks followed, head hung low. Malcolm Hayes stood up and buttoned his jacket. He turned to Rachel Thompson, who was packing her briefcase with trembling hands. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears of relief. "We did it," she whispered. "No," Malcolm corrected her gently. "You did it. I just opened the door. You walked through it." "What happens to them now?" Rachel asked, watching the empty doorway where the defendants had vanished. "Now," Malcolm said, "they experience the reality they created." In the county jail, Edward Caldwell was stripped of his suit. He was forced to squat and cough while a guard, a young man who didn't know or care who he used to be, searched him for contraband. He was handed a jumpsuit that was too large and smelled of industrial detergent and sweat. He was shackled waist and ankles and loaded onto a transport bus. As he shuffled down the aisle of the bus, the other prisoners looked at him. These weren't the low-level offenders from the county jail. These were long-timers, hardened men. "Hey," a voice hissed from the back of the bus. "Ain't that Judge Caldwell?" Caldwell froze. He tried to make himself small. "It is." Another voice laughed. A cruel, jagged sound. "Yo, Judge, remember me? You gave me 15 years for robbery in the second degree. My lawyer asked for 5. You said you wanted to make an example out of me." I remember him. A heavy-set man with tattoos on his face growled. He denied my appeal without even reading it. Caldwell began to hyperventilate. The bus engine roared to life. It was a long drive to the maximum security facility. For Edward Caldwell, it would be the longest drive of his life. The hell he had built for others was now his permanent address. The sun was shining on the corner of 4th and Main Street, the disputed land that had started it all. The construction fences for the luxury condos were gone. The Vanguard Holdings sign was also gone. In its place, a new sign was being erected by a crew of workers. The Hayes and Thompson Legal Aid Center, equal justice for all pro bono services. Malcolm Hayes stood on the sidewalk watching the sign go up. Rachel Thompson stood next to him holding 2 coffees. "I still can't believe you donated the land," Rachel said, shaking her head. "That lot is worth millions." "It was never about the money," Malcolm said, taking a sip of coffee. "That land was bait. Now that the rats are caught, the trap doesn't need to exist anymore. But this community needs something permanent. They need to know that if they walk into a courtroom, they have a fighting chance." "I resigned from the public defender's office this morning," Rachel announced. Malcolm turned to her, feigning surprise. "Oh, and what are you going to do?" "Well," Rachel smiled, pointing at the sign, "I hear the director of this new legal aid center is looking for a partner. Someone who knows how to fight. Malcolm smiled, that rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I think you're overqualified, but the job is yours if you want it." "I want it," Rachel said firmly. They watched as a group of people approached the unfinished building. It was the mothers of the Fourth. They weren't wearing white mourning clothes today. They were wearing bright colors. They brought pies, flowers, and cards. They came to thank the man who had listened when no one else would. One of the women, an elderly matriarch named Mrs. Wilkins, walked up to Malcolm. She reached up and cupped his face with her weathered hands. "They said you were just a troublemaking lawyer," she said softly. "I've been called worse." Malcolm chuckled. "You're an angel." "That's what you are," she said. "You gave me my son back. His case is under review. He's coming home." Malcolm took her hands. "That wasn't me, Mrs. Wilkins. That was the law finally working the way it's supposed to. Maybe." She patted his cheek. "But the law needs good hands to hold it." Malcolm looked over the crowd, then at the building rising behind him. He thought of Caldwell in his cell, realizing that power isn't about how many people you can crush, but how many you can lift up. The corruption was a weed, deep and tangled, but they had pulled it out by the root. And here on this corner, something new was finally growing. "Ready to get to work, partner?" Malcolm asked Rachel. Rachel adjusted her bag, looking at the line of people already waiting for help. "I'm ready," she said. Together they walked toward the entrance of the center, leaving the ghosts of the past behind them, walking into a future where justice wasn't just a word, but a promise kept. And that is how the corrupt empire of Judge Caldwell and Prosecutor Brooks came crashing down. They thought they were the predators, but they forgot that in the jungle of justice there is always a bigger lion. Malcolm Hayes didn't just beat them. He used their own arrogance to destroy them, proving that no one is above the law, especially those sworn to uphold it. In the quiet aftermath of shattered power and fallen empires, one truth rises above the chaos like a steady heartbeat. No one is untouchable when they twist the scales of justice for personal gain. Malcolm Hayes didn't storm into that courtroom with anger or revenge in his eyes. He walked in as a silent guardian of the very system that had been corrupted, allowing greed and arrogance to expose themselves fully before delivering the final blow. What makes this story so deeply moving is how it reminds us that real justice isn't loud or flashy. It's patient, methodical, and rooted in quiet integrity. We all face moments when those in power seem invincible, when the system feels rigged against the ordinary person trying to live with dignity. Yet, this tale whispers a powerful lesson straight to the heart. True strength lies not in crushing others, but in lifting the forgotten, listening to the unheard voices of mothers fighting for their sons, and refusing to let corruption silence the vulnerable. Malcolm showed us that the greatest weapon against injustice isn't fury. It's preparation, courage, and an unshakable belief that the law, when held by honest hands, can still protect the innocent and humble the mighty. It's a reminder that every act of quiet integrity plants seeds for a better tomorrow, turning broken corners of our cities into places of hope and healing. Never underestimate the power of staying calm in the storm, of gathering evidence instead of shouting, and of believing that karma, though it may take time, eventually finds its way. If this story stirred something deep inside you, the fire for fairness, the ache for accountability, or the quiet hope that good still wins, drop a comment below and tell me, what's one moment in your life when patience and integrity changed everything? Which part of Malcolm's journey moved you the most? And if you believe in stories that restore faith in justice, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next tale of karma hitting back with grace and power. Let's keep building a community that celebrates truth and courage together. See you in the next story. Stay strong, stay just,